Well, thank you, Ian. I will always remember your name, not only the tartan tie, but because my son's name is Ian, named after a Scot as well. So, good morning, everyone. Are you awake? Are you ready? So yesterday, as we arrived and we jumped in our ride to come to the hotel, the driver said, "Oh, are you here for Mardi Gras?" And we said, "No, we're coming for the National Association of Conservation Districts annual meeting." And the driver was like, "Oh, that sounds fun." And we're like, "It is fun. It's incredible. This is how we do our work that we all care about so deeply." So yes, it is fun. And we happen to be in an incredible place. Thank you, Louisiana, for hosting us, and at a lovely time of year. So good morning. And I want to say express what an incredible honor it is for me to be here, for you to include the Fish and Wildlife Service, and to recognize the value of our partnerships, because it is our work model. Our mission starts with working with others. If Chief Cosby has said throughout this conference that his middle name is delivery, the Fish and Wildlife Service, we're the little engine that can get things done. And we get things done only through our partnerships with every one of you in this room. So what an honor to be here to talk about partnerships, because they are essential for conservation delivery. Before jumping in, I thought I would just go through a little bit of my own belief system, and to let you know, Ian, you forgot one piece, and that is that I grew up on a farm, many generations of farmers in my family, and I spend my weekends helping my 90-plus-year-old parents on the farm, keeping it going. And so that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. But I also believe that wildlife conservation is a shared responsibility. And to be successful in this conservation community, we must find ways to work collaboratively, particularly with stewards of private and tribal lands. Think through, well, I just got back from a trip in Mexico, where I was there with some others in this room I know, looking at butterfly sanctuaries. And it was so stark to me that you cannot conserve ecosystem functions that then support specific species in just little pockets or sanctuaries of land. That indeed it's the connection to working landscapes, tribal lands, private lands are absolutely, indigenous lands are critical to those ecosystem functions and wildlife as well. And I often think that people support that which they help build. The more inclusive we are in our work, the more engaged everyone can be, then they'll support that work. And when you are part of building it, you also develop a love for it. And we stand up for those things that we love. So if we can commit to true partnership and inclusion, I believe that we do have a tremendous opportunity right now to make significant progress on the natural resource issues facing all of us. As leaders in the conservation community, we know that nature is essential to health, well-being, and the prosperity of all Americans. Clean air, clean water, ecosystem functions are so important to community life, to our economies. We know, too, that we're facing unprecedented challenges at the local, state, tribal, and federal wildlife and conservation agencies. We're managing our nation's natural resources, and we have the privilege to be doing so. at a time when invasive species, wildfire, habitat fragmentation, and other threats are having a large-scale impact on habitats and biodiversity across the country. Climate change, too, is driving or exacerbating many of these issues, and is something that we can no longer afford to ignore. But there's a lot of hope, too. Your theme this year, local resiliency, national community, serves as a reminder to all of us that we need to find, and we can find, effective ways to work together as a national conservation community to support local efforts to build resiliency in the face of climate change and other threats. So that while these challenges may be daunting, I also truly believe that there has never been a time of greater opportunity to address these challenges if we work together. And I say that very seriously, if we work together. If we work together, we can do this. So let's take advantage of this moment in time and I will talk through some new tools available to us and resources. One is provided by the launch of the America the Beautiful initiative, and also investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So the America the Beautiful, as directed by President Biden's executive order, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, through this, the Department of the Interior partnered with the Department of Agriculture, Commerce, National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, the White House's Council on Environmental Quality, Department of Defense, pulling all of the federal agencies together to develop recommendations on how to advance in an inclusive and collaborative vision. So to meet that moment, the administration launched a report called The America the Beautiful, with the purpose to conserve, connect, and restore lands, waters, and wildlife upon which we all depend. The initial report, Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful, released in May 2021, establishes this framework, but built through much comment, and I think that actually, if you see early drafts of the report and the final draft, that it really took into account the comment that came in. So a notable piece of it, and a crucial piece of it, and especially at this conference, is that it acknowledges, it celebrates the voluntary conservation efforts of farmers, ranchers, forest owners, and other working lands, because we all know in this room that these working landscapes are so important in so many ways. I want to go through, because I think this can get lost. I totally understand that some fully embrace the America the Beautiful initiative, and some have thought, what is this? And have wanted to see it in action. So I think it bears reading and repeating. I go through this myself almost every week, the principles that hold up the America the Beautiful initiative, because I think every one of us in this room have learned these principles over time, that we've learned this is what works. To pursue a collaborative and an inclusive approach to conservation. We don't leave anyone out. It's not top-down. To conserve America's lands and waters for the benefit of all people. To support locally led and locally designed conservation efforts. To honor tribal sovereignty and support the priorities of tribal nations. To pursue conservation and restoration approaches that create jobs and support healthy communities. To honor private property rights and support the voluntary stewardship efforts of private landowners. To use science as a guide. to build on existing tools and strategies with an emphasis on flexibility and adaptive approaches, as Ian said, right? It's place matters, communities matter. One size fits all is not what we need, nor is it what we're looking for. So America the Beautiful is about working with communities to identify what conservation approaches, programs, and projects work best for that community. And we, from the federal government, especially the Fish and Wildlife Service, we want to invest in those efforts and stitch them together in a way that allows for these collaborative and inclusive approaches to conservation across the country. So one way, a positive and concrete way that we're doing this is through the America the Beautiful Challenge. And this has been led by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So the foundation consolidates funding from multiple federal agencies and the private sector to allow applicants to conceive and develop large-scale projects that address conservation priorities and span public and private lands. I'm thinking there may even be an example of one from Louisiana that's coming up soon. So the challenge is anchored by an initial commitment of $440 million in federal resources over 5 years through fiscal year 2026. An enormous investment in what we all do together. So these grants fund locally led ecosystem restoration projects that invest in watershed restoration, resilience, equitable access, workforce development, capacity building, corridors, and connectivity, and ultimately collaborative conservation. And the first round of America the Beautiful Challenge grants was announced last November. Raise your hand, I'm just curious if any of you in the room were involved in any of those initial rounds of projects. Uh-oh, Louisiana. So that's something for us to work on. NIFWF, staff members in the room, and I, through statute, sit on the board of NIFWF. I'll take note because the point is to build this. So nearly $91 million in grants were awarded and leveraged with an additional $50 million in matching contributions. So I think that's goes again to the theme of this conference of building from those collaborative efforts and leveraging so that we can deliver far more conservation on the ground. So another tool that is new is the bipartisan infrastructure law. I affectionately call it BILL. And in tandem with the America the Beautiful, we're really focused on implementing Chief Cosby delivering Fish and Wildlife Service, the little engine that can get it done, get this money on the ground to make the biggest impact that we can. So thinking about BILL, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, it is a once-in-a-generation investment meant to help local, state, and tribal communities tackle the climate crisis while advancing environmental justice, boosting local economies, and furthering wildlife conservation. This transformational investment includes $91 million in annual funding for the Fish and Wildlife Services programs over 5 years, and additional funding for states and tribes for ecosystem restoration, wildland fire management, and other activities. With an additional $1.4 billion investment in ecosystem restoration and resilience available to the interior bureaus, we will bolster that funding for stewardship contracts, ecosystem restoration projects, invasive species detection and prevention, and increasing the supply of native seeds and plants that are so essential to habitat restoration efforts across the country. So funding these efforts will help address intensifying drought, How many of you in the room are dealing with drought? Right? More hands. It's a common challenge that we all share. Wildfire. How many of you in the room deal with wildfire? It's in clumps, but yeah. And then flooding. Legacy pollution. So I hope, at least in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that it touches so many of us. And it's really meant to help, I think, the economy and communities as well. So it's that while we face these challenges, we also have this opportunity that we, at least in the Fish and Wildlife Service, have really never had. So the third new tool that I'm going to mention is the Inflation Reduction Act. And this was signed into law last August. Combined with the bipartisan infrastructure law, it represents one of the largest investments in climate resilience and resource protection in this country's history. It provided the Department of the Interior, with which the Fish and Wildlife Service is a bureau, with $500 million for land resilience, conservation, and habitat restoration activities. It also provides money to strengthen the Endangered Species Act efforts. And I just want to put a pin in that right here as the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. I feel that too often people think of the Fish and Wildlife Service, yes, we implement the Endangered Species Act, and we do so much more. We are not a regulatory agency by nature. And I think of the fact that we're invited here and how incredibly important all of our partnerships are shows that we would like to work with everyone to be to prevent species from needing to be listed to begin with. So we're really excited to get these funds on the ground to benefit fish and wildlife and support everyone's ongoing efforts throughout the country. We also very much look forward to working with Chief Cosby and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, along with all of our other partners, Department of Defense, to help implement $20 billion in additional funding provided through the Inflation Reduction Act for the NRCS conservation programs and for technical assistance. So important. So I hope you are hearing that the service is because our mission starts with working with others, because we understand this is a collective issue, that we are most effective in working together, that we want to be known as a partner with all of you in voluntary and in incentive-based conservation. We know that 70% of our nation's landscape is in private ownership, and the health of our fish and wildlife populations, our communities, depends on habitat found on private lands. For the Fish and Wildlife Service to achieve its conservation goals and live up to our trust responsibilities, we must and we enjoy coordinating conservation efforts with conservation districts, with the USDA, with state agencies, landowners, and all of our other conservation partners. We understand it's a necessity, and it's something we enjoy doing. And thankfully, we have a long history of doing so, but we haven't always had the financial support to do it. Again, we're the little engine that can get it done. So we will continue to invest in our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program and our coastal program to support conservation on private lands. How many of you in this room have worked either with our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program or with our coastal program? Awesome. Next time, if I get invited back, Ian, next time I want to see everyone's hands raised. So I think we'll jump ahead. I just I can't wait to further support both our Partners program and our coastal programs, because I think those are the face of conservation in the future, and they're the face of the Fish and Wildlife Service, showing that we are there to help. Conservation districts are one of our most important partners in conservation, and the work that we do together is, I think, setting the foundation for many conservation outcomes in the future. It's those long-standing relationships. It doesn't happen overnight. The conservation doesn't, but it's those long-standing relationships we build over time that are most durable and I think are the most helpful in the future. You, as community stakeholders, play a vital role in both identifying the local resource concerns, and you join forces with other partners to identify the best approach in your place, in your area. And so the hallmark for the Fish and Wildlife Service's voluntary conservation programs with conservation districts is, again, taking time to build trust with landowners in the local community. So an example of this success comes from conservation districts in the South Dakota Association of Conservation Districts, along with the Services Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. Anyone from South Dakota in the room? Yay! I can't wait to talk to you later. So the South Dakota Association of Conservation Districts was the original partner that helped launch the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program in the early 1990s throughout South Dakota. And the South Dakota Association of Conservation Districts and their local county affiliates continue to be absolutely vital partners and are the primary reason the Partners program has been able to deliver over 7,500 projects over the past 3 decades. This partnership collectively involved local landowner cooperators in on-the-ground grassland, wetland, and riparian conservation projects involving more than 20% of South Dakota's working farms and ranches. Thank you. An example of our work also with private landowners to recover listed species through the Partners program is occurring in Bienville Parish, right here in Louisiana. So if I mentioned, what we'd really like to prevent species from needing to be listed to begin with, we also want to get species to recovery. So this project involves restoration and enhancement of open longleaf pine forest with native herbaceous understory on 928 acres using prescribed burning and invasive species control. And it also improves habitat for the threatened Louisiana pine snake and its main prey, the Baird's pocket gopher. I do laugh every day we celebrate at the crazy different names of species that you just can't make up. So Baird's pocket gopher is pretty straightforward. So as so often is the case, this project also benefits at-risk species, including the frosted elfin butterfly, the monarch butterfly, and Henslow's sparrow, and Bachman's sparrow. So we will, throughout this conference, I hope, really get to highlight and talk more about our partnership between the service and the South Dakota Association of Conservation Districts, and our 20-year partnership with the Victoria Soil and Water Conservation District and the landowners on the Texas Gulf Coast during this afternoon's breakout session at 11:30. Over the past 10 years, the Services Partners program and our coastal program have worked with 244 individual conservation district partners and have have over 1,200 projects to restore fish and wildlife habitat on over 57,000 acres and key 165 miles of streams. Our Partners program and our coastal program are each guided by 5-year strategic plans that identify focal areas and priority species with you, with the community. So we look forward to working on updating those plans with your input. Really important, and we're really excited to continue that work. So before wrapping up, I want to announce that the service and the National Association of Conservation Districts are renewing our commitment to collaborative conservation at this annual meeting. And I'm also excited and pleased to be here to sign a new Memorandum of Understanding with President Crowder. The new MOU expands the scope of our previous one with the NACD to strengthen our partnership, to demonstrate our commitment to our partnership at the national, state, and local levels, and to help deliver conservation to our nation's farmers, ranchers, and forest owners. Again, conservation works best, is most durable. I don't need to tell you this. I think you all, if you had put my speech together, I hope would have said some of these very same things. Works best if local communities are engaged and take the lead. And this doesn't just apply to working lands and agricultural communities spread across the middle of our country. It also applies to urban communities that have been underrepresented in our conservation efforts. It also applies to Native American tribes. I know that coming from Montana, that if we're going to conserve some of these iconic endangered species into the future, you can't do it without working with the tribes. So to truly embrace collaborative conservation, we need to make sure we're working with all Americans. Again, people support that which they help build. So I really look forward to working with you on our long and productive partnership, and including not just conservation districts, but the states who are here, local governments, other agencies, and tribes. So I look forward to hearing from you. Come up and find me while I am here. And a shout out to the Fish and Wildlife Service employees who are here if you want to talk to them. Would you guys stand up pretty please? So if you can't find me, find our other Fish and Wildlife staff who I'm incredibly proud of. So just thank you so much. I look forward to working with you, and thank you for what you do every day, day in, day out.